you were perceived a different way prior to Guardians, as this kind
Right.
of like guy on the outskirts, this perverse kind of ex-trauma guy.
Iconoclast. Yes. Yes.
Exactly. Does it boggle your mind to this day, like where you stand, where you sit, and like you are the center of pop culture? It doesn't get any more centered than the movies you've made the last decade.
I just don't perceive it, and I just don't look. I try as little as possible to think of myself how other people think of myself. In a lot of ways, it just so doesn't matter to my life, you know.
Right.
Yeah, but it wasn't that I always wanted to make bigger movies. It's not that I didn't want to make movies that were more mainstream or whatever you might think. Like that was always a part of my plan for myself. It just didn't. It just took a few years to get there.
Do you think though, like that sensibilities have also changed a bit?
Hugely. I think if Super came out today, it would be perceived much differently. I mean, listen, you go back to 1998, I made a movie called The Specials, which was a commentary on superheroes,
right.
Made like before real superhero movies were out, really. So yes, I've always, just because now comic book culture, which was the culture that I grew up with through reading comic books, not through seeing movies. Now comic book culture is made mainstream through movies, not through comic books. So all of those sort of themes and weird things that interested me about comic book superheroes. What is it, with Frank Darbo and Super, what does it really mean to be a vigilante? A guy who beats up people for doing what he thinks of as wrong. What is that like in real life? I think that's a much more interesting premise to people today than it was when I made that movie, who didn't have anything to compare it with.
It also, though, you would admit, I would think that, like, as the years have progressed, you've also found a way to inject more heart, more emotion in these films that still have like a perverse nature at times. You found a way to have them commingle, and that's maybe your greatest accomplishment, I would argue, the last 10 years.
Yeah, I think I'm just much more emotionally grounded. I mean, that's me. I mean, but if you look back at my first movie, Romeo and Juliet, you look back at The Specials, you look back at Super, those all have really emotional aspects to them. I mean, like really, it could be argued that the emotionality of Super was the main, the primary aspect of that film. So that emotionalism was always there. It was always present. I've always been an emotional person, but I think that I am a little bit less, I don't want to say I'm less punk rock, but whatever. There was always a need to like push somebody's buttons to mess with someone. Like there's an aggressiveness I had both as a person and in my work earlier on that I let go of, and that's for a lot of reasons, but I don't deal with things aggressively in my life generally.
Right.
So
that's a part of maturity for all of us. I mean, like that's our everyone's 20s is about just like, fuck the system. I need to like rebel against everything. And at a certain point, you're like, I can still be that, but everything doesn't have to be a fuck you to the world.
Yeah. I mean, I don't get excited by offending people.